Hey, I'm Ray. I'm a freelance visual effects artist, and in my channel, I'm talking about 3D visual effects and design. Today is the last episode of our Blender Space Elevator asset creation series. And in this episode, we're going to add some assets which we can find from the internet library, do some lighting, and render out everything as a turntable. If you have any questions and suggestions, please let me know in the comment section. And with that being said, let's get started. The modeling and the texturing part is already finished. And now it's time to add some more extras, which I would find them on the internet. And in my case, I downloaded the assets from Kitbash 3D, but it's up to you where you want to download the 3D assets. The very important thing is that you have to download some assets which would also fit your own design in terms of style and also in terms of 3D details. Some might argue that the design then isn't entirely my own in that case. However, I believe it's perfectly fine to download and use assets from the internet. The core structure of the lift is still my design, and using pre-made assets for generic elements like solar panel and radar saves me time without compromising the originality of my work, right? There are definitely some assets or tasks which you have to make everything from scratch. But for my case, I don't think that is necessary. And downloading 3D assets from libraries is a common practice for freelancers and CGI studios, unless you are working for a major visual effects studio using pre-made assets is pretty normal in this industry. Where do we download the 3D assets? So Kitbash 3D is very much a very good site. I downloaded the pack Lunar Base. I paste a link in the description below. It's pretty expensive, but I do think the assets are very much high quality. And I definitely gonna reuse them in my future science fiction projects. So I think for me, it's worth it. You can also download 3D assets from Turbosquid. Pay attention that when you download the assets, they need to match the assets that you model and designed first. And second, when you download single assets from Turbosquid, and it's not from a pack like on Kitbash 3D, it has a problem that the single assets they need to match each other, and also they need to match the main assets that you designed. So definitely take some time because it sounds sometimes way easier just to download assets, but it's not so easy as it sounds. And you can also check out some influencer on YouTube, for example, Carl Häuser. I hope I pronounce his name correctly. He is doing a lot of like science fiction tutorials, and you can also download his 3D assets. I think it's on his Patreon, where he also has like satellite and turbines, all this kind of science fiction mechanical assets. You can download them. It's way cheaper than Kitbash 3D, and I do think it has like a very good quality. Anyway, there are many websites where you can download different assets. Feel free to make some research because it's a little bit like making like a collage with Photoshop where you collect different images and you collage them together into one composite, into one image. And that is the same for 3D. Because at the end, everything needs to match in terms of color, style, and also whether it's low poly, high poly. It should not be very much visible when something is like way more detailed and then the other assets like very low polygon. Now I want to render out the turntable. And to render out anything, I need to set up the camera. To set up the camera, I need to create a collection, click on the collection and click on Shift A, create a camera, and drag the camera to the spots where the elevator is. And now it is important to set up this camera as the active camera, right? Because if you have more than one camera in the scene, let's say I created a camera 001 before, and if that is the active camera and I click on 0 to be in the camera view, then it's gonna show me this camera as the active camera, and logically I see through the lens of this camera. But if I want to have this one as the active camera, I need to click on the camera. So there's a little cube around it. I want to have two viewports. So I'm going to go to the corner where the cross is going to show up. And let me drag out one more viewport. And on the left, I want to have the camera view. And on the right, I want to simply have a 3D viewport. To leave the camera view, I can just click on 0. That's the shortcut to toggle view from camera and leaving the view from camera. And the next thing I want to do is, I kind of find it a little bit confusing that outside of the camera is still transparent. So I'm gonna go to the camera option and go to viewport display. And there is one selection, it's called Passepartout 2. And I want to set it to 0. So I only see through the lens of the camera and everything else is black. And now you can see when I scroll on my middle mouse button, I just scale up and down this frame. What if I want to control the camera from the me perspective, right? I need to click on N, go to view and camera to viewports. And you can already see that when I control the camera here, the camera also moves on the right. In my turntable rendering, I also want to show this rotational movement of the elevator straight away. So that's why I need to create a rotational movements of the elevator. I have many different ways to rotate the elevator. For example, I can join all the meshes, but because certain parts has like different modifier, and I already told you joining objects which already have modifier, it can be very confusing for Blender because you also gonna join the modifier of the object straight away. A better way to do that is to parent all part of the elevator to a empty and then to animate the empty. So let's create a new empty plain axis, make it slightly bigger so I can see that. And now just select all parts of the elevator and parent it with the rotation axis. Now let me go to the top view and I want to do one 360-degree rotation, right? I need my timeline and click on the rotation axis. Let me click on K to insert a keyframe on rotation. And if you succeeded, you can already see that there is one keyframe on 0. And let's say on the last keyframe of 60, I want to have 360-degree. I can control the movement here, right? Or I can just also enter a 360-degree, click on K, rotation. And now I have a rotation from 0 to 360. And if I push the keyframe to 100, depending on which frame, logically, the whole movement will be a little bit slower. Now I only have one rotation, right? But after the frame hundreds, the rotation gonna stop. So I want to have the rotation repeating itself all the time. I can go into the keyframe and copy paste it, but that's just like way too complicated. And the possibility to make a mistake is very high. So let me open one tab. And now I want to have the graph editor. And yeah, you can see between the two keyframes, there is this curve going on. So it's a basic curve. And what it means is that the movement at the beginning is slow, and in the middle, it's going to be faster. And at the end, it's going to slow down again. And I want to have the movement of the rotation all the time the same. So which means I actually need a straight line here. So let me select these two keyframes, click on the right mouse button, select interpolation and linear. And now the whole movement's gonna be the same speed. So the movement will stop after 360-degree. And how do I let the movement repeat itself? I need to go into the graph editor and click on N, go into modifier and add a modifier, which is called cycles. Now you can see the straight line gonna repeat itself, and we have this kind of endless loop going on. I want to show that the elevator goes upwards. Now it's just rotating at the same spots, which means that I need to move the shaft downwards, right? Here I did the same. I selected all the meshes of the shaft and parented it with a movement axis. Once it's connected, I can give it a keyframe at 0. And at the last frame, I can just move the axis downwards. Let me select both keyframe and click on interpolation and select a linear interpolation because I want the speeds to be the same from start to the end. It's time for lighting. So I'm gonna go from solid mode into our rendering mode. And maybe in your case looks like this, and that is the cause of the environment lighting. So let's go into the world properties, and here you can change the color of your environment, and logically in space it should be dark. So let's change it to dark, and now we can't see anything because we don't have any light source. In our case, we're gonna keep it fairly simple. We're just gonna use one sunlight and maybe a little bit of arrow light. And I think that would just simulate, the light condition in space. Super simple. And we hit Shift A again. As I said, there are like 4 different light types. And in our case, let's just add one sunlight. And we don't see anything yet because the strength of the sunlight is kind of weak. Let me strengthen our light source a little bit and create kind of a light which is a little bit dramatic. And now you can see, because we only have one light source, the shadow can be a little bit dark. Normally, when it's on Earth, I would use HDRI, but because we kind of have this kind of space look, the shadow can be very dark. But if it's just too dark for you, add one area light. I just changed the color because I want to see where my light is. But of course, it should be a bit wider. And then maybe not too strong, because we still want to keep our dark shadow, but by adding this light area lights, we don't want all the details vanishing in the shadow. Time for our rendering. Before you render any animation, right, I would really test render one frame at least, because like you don't want to render 200 frames and the computer is rendering for hours and you didn't test render one frame. And before rendering, we need to set up our properties. So go to output properties. And in my case, I have the aspect ratio 21:9, which is kind of typical cinema aspect ratio. And the resolution is 1920 to 818. If you want to test render something and the render is going way too slow, you can also reduce the resolution by just rendering half of the resolution when this is on 50. And if you want to output 4K, of course, you can set it up to 200%, right? And that is our, the numbers for our resolution. And also the output setting is important. Set up a path where you can find your rendering. You should open a new bin, right? And copy the path and all your render gonna go into this bin. And what I also would propose is don't choose the MP4, choose the PNG sequence. Why? Because sometimes one frame, it takes up to 5 to 10 minutes, but also 1 minute is it's not a short time. And you have to imagine when you render a whole sequence of 200 frames or 400 frames, and it's one video file and one frame it crashes, and that's gonna destroy the whole rendering that you're trying to export. So when you have a PNG sequence and when one frame just crashes, it's not such a big deal because then you can just later render out that one frame which didn't come out properly. But when you render out one MP4 or one video file, it's gonna just destroy the whole sequence. So that's something that we don't want it to happen. And to our render properties, set up the device to GPU compute because it's going to be way faster. It's less stable than the CPU, but it's just like way faster. And also go to edit preferences. And if you have it unknown, click on optics and, activate all your graphic cards that is in your laptop. Let's say this is probably one of the biggest challenges when you're rendering for the first time. The rendering is coming out way too slow. It takes you like 15 minutes, 30 minutes, right? For example, here, I render the image. I think this one is like quite fast because we only have one light source. You can see the remaining time and the time that we already rendered. And one frame needed 26 seconds. So it's like half minutes. And let's say your render, by any reason, maybe you added way more lights and maybe the resolution is way higher. It's like 4K, right? And you want to speed up the rendering. You can reduce the resolution, but it's painful because you want to have like a high-res image. One way to speed up your render super fast is just to reduce the sample number. For example, let's say I have 512 and let's render the image again. And you can see I only needed 5 seconds for this rendering. But of course, you should compare, the 2096 sample with like a lower number and see how much the quality is reduced. Because the lower the number, the faster is the rendering, but the lower is also the quality. But sometimes the quality gap isn't so big, and I would prefer to take the faster render. And one common mistake, I see people always doing the same mistake, it just happens. So you have like a bigger scene and somehow you have this kind of cube that you created, and it's kind of a draft. You were thinking, okay, let me just gonna hide it, right? And then this is gone and looks fine. But when you render it, you can see that the cube is still there because it is not enough just to hide it. You also need to click on the camera so it doesn't render it out. Or you can also add this cube to a collection. Same here, you can deselect the camera or you just deselect the whole box. right? And then that's gonna deactivate the whole cube in it. And when you're ready to go, you can just render one sequence by hitting render and render animation, and that's gonna export everything into the assigned path. You have come a long way, so congratulations for that. You can use your own space elevator that you did for the last episodes, create a rotation animation, add some lighting, and render everything out. And at the end, hopefully you can use this turntable for your portfolio. I recommend the format 16:9 or 21:9. If you wish, send me your result as a video in an MP4 format, and I can give you a feedback and also show your work online for other students so that they can understand this task better. We are coming to the end of our Blender asset creation series, and if you have any questions or suggestions, let me know in the comments section. And next time, I'm gonna start a new series where I'm gonna use this space elevator in a visual effects shot. So if you like the content so far, I would really appreciate it if you give me a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. Thank you so much for watching, and I see you next time. Bye.